ATF is waging war on Franklin Armory's new Antithesis firearm, a product specifically designed not to be a short-barreled rifle under federal law. In fact, ATF has demanded that Franklin Armory pull the firearm from stores, cancel all orders, and recall all sold items. Why? That's what we're about to find out. Hi, I'm Ben, and you're watching the Minuteman Moment. A couple years ago, Franklin Armory developed a product called the Antithesis, a firearm that looks like a short-barreled rifle, but actually isn't one. That's because federal law defines a rifle as being designed to fire only a single projectile through a rifled bore for each single pull of the trigger. In contrast, the Antithesis was designed to fire both .45 long Colt ammunition and .410 bore shotgun shells. So, because it could fire multiple projectiles, it fell outside the single projectile part of the definition of rifle. And because the Antithesis couldn't be classified as a rifle for that reason, that means it couldn't be a short-barreled rifle. So, Franklin Armory gave it a shoulder stock and a 14.5-inch barrel. Absolutely brilliant. But unsurprisingly, ATF did not like this workaround to the National Firearms Act. In 2021, ATF classified the Antithesis as a short-barreled rifle, claiming the fact that it had a rifle barrel proved it was not actually designed to shoot .410 bore shotgun shells, even though it could. In other words, the mere fact that the Antithesis could shoot multiple projectiles wasn't enough for the ATF. So, Franklin Armory sued ATF. And in February of this year, the U.S. District Court for the District of North Dakota ruled in Franklin Armory's favor. As Judge Daniel M. Traynor explained, the Antithesis is fit and chambered for both .45 Colt rifle cartridges and .410 bore shotgun shells. Franklin Armory designed it this way intentionally. Taking the plain language of the statute, the Antithesis cannot be considered a rifle under the GCA or the NFA. The Antithesis is a square peg, and calling it round will not change how it fits into the round hole of these statutes. Therefore, ATF exceeded its authority by not giving the plain meaning to the words of the statute. Talk about a judicial smackdown. But this isn't the first time that Franklin Armory has attempted to produce a firearm that falls outside the regulatory framework of the National Firearms Act. In fact, in 2018, Franklin Armory announced the Reformation, an AR-15 style firearm with a short barrel that does not have rifling. Instead, it had straight cut grooves into the barrel. Because of this unique feature, Franklin Armory argued that the Reformation could not be a rifle, since it didn't have actual rifling. And it couldn't be a shotgun either, since it was not actually smoothbore like the definition of shotgun requires. So like the Antithesis, Franklin Armory argued that the Reformation was just a firearm under the Gun Control Act, and could be sold like any regular firearm without falling under the NFA as either an SBR or an SBS. But of course, in 2019, ATF caught wind of the Reformation project and issued an open letter, classifying it as a short-barreled shotgun. This too was addressed in Franklin Armory's recent lawsuit against ATF, and like with the Antithesis, Judge Traynor sided with Franklin Armory on the Reformation, reasoning that it also fell outside the NFA's definition. With this double defeat in court and a new Trump administration in office, ATF eventually entered into a settlement agreement with Franklin Armory that the Reformation and the Antithesis firearms are not NFA items. As part of this settlement, on August 29, 2025, ATF sent an open letter to all FFLs regarding the Antithesis and the Reformation. The letter announced ATF's decision to rescind its previous classifications that the Antithesis and the Reformation were NFA items, and it assured the public that these products could be purchased as regular firearms. For the Antithesis, ATF wrote that the Antithesis is not a rifle, short-barreled rifle, nor is it an NFA firearm. Therefore, no NFA forms are necessary to sell, transfer, transport, deliver, or otherwise deal in or possess the Antithesis. In the open letter, there's even an instruction for firearms dealers on how to properly transfer the Antithesis on a 4473. But here's where we get into the subject of today's video. After the release of this letter, Franklin Armory proceeded to release the Antithesis in a whole bunch of new configurations, including a 5.56 NATO chambering. Wait, 5.56? That's right, Franklin Armory identified a new type of multiple projectile ammunition that the 5.56 Antithesis could fire, arguing that this meant it too fell outside the definition of rifle, just like the .45 long Colt and .410 bore Antithesis. Everything was looking good for Franklin Armory, but that's when the higher-ups at ATF stepped in and shut it down. Within days of the release of the 5.56 Antithesis, Franklin Armory put out a statement that read, ATF has requested that we voluntarily bring back all 5.56 chamber Antithesis firearms in advance of the agency issuing a new classification. We were surprised by this in light of the U.S. District Court's ruling in Frack v. Bondi. According to reporting from AMOLand News on Thursday, September 18, 2025, the ATF threatened Franklin Armory with possible issuance of a cease and desist letter if it continued to sell the Antithesis. The ATF also demanded that Franklin Armory recall all 5.56 versions that were sold. But we thought the Trump administration had this to say about targeting gun owners.
Yesterday, I fired the general counsel from ATF. These people were targeting gun owners. Not going to happen under this administration.
Not going to happen under this administration. Well, Ms. Bondi, I hate to inform you, but it's happening once again under this administration. According to the ATF, the new multiple projectile round that Franklin Armory released alongside the 5.56 Antithesis doesn't mean that the firearm fits the same classification as the district court decision. Why? ATF claims that the new multiple projectile 5.56 round is too exotic and just a prototype, so they can't possibly mean that 5.56 guns are now multiple projectile and no longer rifles under federal law. But where does the statute say anything about exotic or prototype ammunition? That's right, it doesn't. And ATF is once again making up law to create a result that it prefers. Of course, this violates the district court's ruling. Even though the district court was discussing the 45 long Colt and 410 bore version of the Antithesis at the time, it clearly explained what matters is Franklin Armory's intent as the designer of the firearm. And here, Franklin Armory clearly intended the 5.56 Antithesis to fire multiple projectiles. That means it's not a rifle. And because it has a rifled barrel, it's not a shotgun either. It's just a firearm, and it falls outside of the NFA. But ATF couldn't possibly allow such an outcome, because that would mean all 5.56 rifles would be exempt from the NFA. Well, what's so bad about that? Isn't this administration supposed to be pro-gun? Well, in response, ATF's open letter engaged in scare tactics. For example, ATF tried to say that accepting Franklin Armory's reasoning would mean that popular 5.56 firearms would no longer be long guns, and so federal law would prevent young adults under the age of 21 from purchasing them from dealers, just like in the case of handguns. But the law that they're trying to use for this claim has been ruled unconstitutional by a Fifth Circuit case, a ruling they didn't even appeal. Finally, ATF claims that if it were to allow the 5.56 Antithesis to be sold as a non-NFA item, then a future administration could just reverse course, ban it, and put gun owners at risk. So ATF thinks that we need to do the gun bans and confiscations now rather than letting a future anti-gun administration do it. That's like saying we need to burn down the town now to save it from being burned down in the future.
Did it, Patrick! We saved the city!
Now this is a lot of legal mumbo jumbo, but the reality is there isn't any legal justification for what the ATF is doing here. Seems to me that a pro-gun ATF would embrace this new Franklin Armory's innovation and work on taking down the NFA rather than trying to limit the market's ingenuity. Hopefully, ATF corrects their mistake here, but until then, we'll keep you updated as the situation develops. Now thanks for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to stay up to date with GOA's latest fights for your rights.